John Zimmerman. I teach at New York University, and I'm going to ask what I fear is a very American question. And I'll be eager. I love the panel, so I'll be eager to hear your responses to it. In a discussion like this in the USA, to borrow the metaphor of obstacles that came up during the discussion, when somebody asks, why doesn't this occur? Generally, there are many answers that arise, but there are two that arise that I didn't hear in this discussion, and I wanted to know if they're applicable. One has to do with the rise of kind of centralized and standardized testing. The idea that states especially, and eventually we think in the United States the federal government, are requiring a certain kind of history that more resembles the professor's soulless march of dates and facts than it does Peter Seixas's historical consciousness. That's one obstacle that people often will mention. The second one has to do with teachers and is a little dicier. The second obstacle that people will say is that we have failed to attract people like Mark Perry into the profession. I have two teenage daughters. I would give my right and my left arms to have them taught by Mark Perry.
Hampton, New Brunswick. Population 3,500, 800 dogs, 600 cats, and
right.
We're a nice community. Come on down.
That would be great. The point is, it hasn't happened yet where I live. And I think the United States has failed to attract people like Mark into the profession. That's not to say there aren't Marks, but there aren't enough of them. And this is actually very connected, I think, to the question of inquiry in the classroom. I think the larger issue that comes up in the US in discussions like this is, let's face it, the kind of pedagogy you're advocating involves an enormous amount of risk-taking on the part of the pedagogue. Inquiry is inherently risky because you don't know where it's going to go. Indeed, if you do know, there's a problem. And to cut to the earlier question, I would say the real problem with social justice pedagogy is too often it's framed as an answer rather than a question. In a democracy, both historically and in contemporary times, human beings will differ dramatically and vehemently about what social justice is. The problem with social justice pedagogy is too often it's presented as a series of answers rather than questions. But the very notion of questioning involves a huge amount of risk. And how can you ask a profession that has very little cultural authority to engage in that risk?
All right, you've got 1 minute between.
Go ahead, Peter. Do that in 1 minute.
I think you've put it very well, and it is risky, and maybe we go back to the concept of wonder, and the possibility that people for a certain amount of time they manage risks. Maybe risk management is on Americans' minds these days, but manage risk in a way, take it in small steps, and understand the wonder that can come out of that and the excitement that comes out of that. Otherwise, the opposite, playing it so safe ends up, I think, with a dull classroom, and so I think that's an incoherent answer. I think you've articulated it well. I would ask our teachers to be managed risk takers.
And on the anti-racism, I too share Peter's congratulations to you. Well put. And in history, I assume that's how one would teach the questions of race. For example, in today's terms, what on earth is race? Is there such a thing? So that's one part. And the other part is, I think we just have to assume that this is a political question. It's a matter of how much you pay teachers. Because if you pay them, you're going to get good ones.
Well, let me just say one more thing. You put the question of teachers in terms of attracting good teachers and not in terms of educating good teachers. And certainly professional development and pre-service training are essential, as Mark has pointed out, essential pieces of the building of a body of exciting teachers.
I'd like to thank our three panelists for their presentations today.